Hi, this is Kendra Shank with Burgess and Niple, giving you an update on the safety study for Cabell and Wayne counties. Just a reminder, the goal of this study is to create a safer transportation network for both motorized and non-motorized modes of transportation. Our focus is on the urbanized areas of Cabell and Wayne County. Our first step is to identify crash trends and crash locations. We'll recommend infrastructure improvements and other strategies, and then prioritize those improvements and strategies, as I'll talk about in this presentation. Here's a timeline of our study process. Right now we're in February. We've just wrapped up our last stakeholder and public meetings, and now we're working on the implementation plan and the draft report, which will be circulated soon. Here's an overview of our ranking methodologies. First, we started with a regional trends analysis, where we looked at the two-county region as a whole and determined crash trends and potential locations. Then we moved into the high-level prioritization, where we took individual intersections and segments and ranked them using equivalent property damage only factors. Next, we took another set of locations and did a detailed prioritization on them using the methods in the Highway Safety Manual. Lastly, in the stage we're at now, we're looking at implementation prioritization, where we're prioritizing locations for improvement based on their benefit-to-cost ratios and benefits to safety. So looking at some of the countermeasures implementation prioritization. Our first step was we looked through the crash analysis. We reviewed all of the crash reports, verified their location, and identified crash patterns. This graphic here on the right illustrates a sample of the collision diagram in the crash report so we could tell exactly what kind of crash was occurring and what problems we may need to be solving at these locations. The next step in our process was just to conduct a field visit. We went to each of the locations and documented potential deficiencies that may be contributing to crashes at these locations. We took pictures and we'll use that for documentation in the report for our potential improvements. The next step in the process was to identify countermeasures. To do this, we employed a multidisciplinary team of roadway and traffic engineers. When identifying the countermeasures, we looked at their feasibility in terms of cost, impact, and level of benefit. So, for example, trying to mitigate angle crashes at an intersection while installing an overpass would mitigate those angle crashes. The level of benefit received compared to the construction costs was not feasible. So therefore, these types of improvements were not considered. Last, we looked at the constructability of these improvements. By widening to add a turn lane, were we going to impact a ditch that would severely increase our construction costs? In those cases, these types of improvements were also not moved forward. We then looked at the benefit-to-cost ratio for each identified improvement. The safety benefit is calculated using crash costs and crash modification factors for each associated improvement. Then, compared to the construction costs, this creates a benefit-to-cost ratio, which was then employed to prioritize locations for improvement. Some of the general countermeasures that were identified include clearance intervals, also known as the yellow and all red times. Properly calculated clearance intervals can reduce angle and rear-end crashes. These clearance intervals are based on the geometry of the intersection and have fairly nominal costs, as it just involves reprogramming the controller with these new clearance intervals. Another countermeasure is signal head visibility, which involves installing backplates, like the photo shown on the right, or LED signal heads. These also can reduce angle and rear-end crashes. One of the biggest needs is to determine if the existing signal can support additional weight and wind load of these backplates. A fact sheet, like the one shown here, was developed for each location. The fact sheet shows the proposed improvements on an aerial image, as well as some details regarding the location. So, for example, the crash patterns at this location are identified to the right, as well as next steps implementation. The next steps for this location would be to collect traffic counts and perform a capacity analysis, especially to make sure that the protected left turn phase does not adversely affect capacity. At the bottom, the cost of improvements, as well as the benefit-to-cost ratio, is also displayed. The next step will be developing an implementation plan. For our infrastructure improvements, there are 4 critical features of this implementation plan. First, the priority of the improvement. This will be based on an implementation prioritization process, which is currently underway. Next, we'll identify the responsible parties for implementing such improvement. This could include West Virginia DOH, Kiowa, or a local agency. Next, we'll identify a time frame for which the improvement should be implemented. This is based on the priorities as well as how many projects are feasible in 1 year. So we wouldn't want to identify 10 projects in 1 year when realistically only 2 to 3 could be implemented based on cost. Lastly, we'll identify potential funding sources. This can include some safety funding from West Virginia DOH, or it could be tied to other West Virginia DOH projects, such as signal upgrade equipment or upgrade projects. In addition to our infrastructure strategies, we will also be identifying non-infrastructure strategies related to education, enforcement, and EMS response. These countermeasures will be based on our trends analysis we conducted in the early part of this process. We could be identifying targeted enforcement for alcohol-related crashes based on our emphasis areas, or looking at increased education for our youngers. Finally, our next steps moving forward. We've received comments from stakeholders regarding our recommendation options at each of the specific locations. We'll be drafting an implementation plan that will be circulated for comment around the end of February, and then we'll be developing a draft report which will be circulated for review in March. Our final report will be completed in May, and the final step to all of this will be implementing these strategies in order to mitigate crashes in Cabell and Wayne County. Thank you.